Cool. Hello again. Welcome back to the Bridge program. Congrats on making it this far. From what I'm seeing, y'all are killing it, which is great. Pat yourselves on the back there. Today we got lesson 5, which is all about creating coherence between sentences and making a paper flow. So before I do that, I'm gonna note one quick thing about my dependent clause video, which I didn't mention that I probably should have, that I noticed in some of y'all's worksheets that you turned in. It's about subjects and verbs in dependent clauses. So, in this example sentence, which was in the worksheet, I have, even though the team won, most of y'all highlighted team as the subject, and then won as the verb, which is correct. And then you said that it didn't make sense on its own, which is also correct. So, y'all got all three, which is awesome. And then with the rewrite, even though the team won, comma, they cried. Something to note here is that the subject and the verb here move. So the subject is now no longer team, and then the verb is no longer won. In this case, the subject is now they, and cried is the verb. This is because dependent clauses cannot contain a subject. They can contain nouns, but they can't contain the subject of the entire sentence. One way you can think about this is because a dependent clause only fulfills 2 out of the 3 requirements for a sentence, subject and verb, but it doesn't make sense on its own. So because it doesn't fulfill all 3 elements of making a complete sentence, it's not allowed, it doesn't have the privilege to contain the subject. That's one way you can think about it. But that is something that some of y'all wrote down in your responses that I didn't go over. So I didn't dock anybody if you marked your subject inside the dependent clause because I didn't go over that. So that's on me. But that was just a quick little thing to go over. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me and I'll try to explain it more if I can. Moving into today's lesson, which is making a coherent sentence and making a coherent paragraph that flows and doesn't sound choppy. So, what do we mean by this? When you're writing a paper, like 99% of the time, you're gonna want to make it pleasant for the reader to read. And by this, we mean we want it to read smoothly and not sound just the same thing over and over and over again. So, for instance, if we're writing a paper about why J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter is the best book series that was ever created. I don't think that, but some people do. But if we're writing a paper about that, one way that someone could write it would be saying something such as, she says this, she made Harry Potter this time, she thinks that Harry Potter stands for this, she loved writing Harry Potter, she drew inspiration from this, she loved it because of this. You might be able to guess what I'm getting at here a little. Some people write using only pronouns and starting their sentences with the same word over and over and over again. In this case, I was using the word she. While pronouns are a great way to address a person, it is never good to solely rely on just one way of addressing someone. When you're writing a paper, it is great to have multiple ways, so you're not sounding redundant and repeating yourself over and over and over again, which makes the reader just think, wow, this is the best that the writer has. So, what are some different ways that you can address somebody in a paper? Number 1, as we went over already, is their pronouns. Number 2, you can use their full name. You typically only want to do this once or twice within a paper. You usually want to do it at the start in your introductory paragraph where you're talking about who it is, and then maybe in your concluding paragraph where you're wrapping up all your ideas. But you don't typically want to do it more than once or twice, then it gets a little much. You can also just use the last name. So if we're talking about J.K. Rowling, we could just say Rowling, and forego the J.K. You can if it's a personable essay where you're writing about someone who doesn't mind being addressed as their first name, you can use their first name. So if I was a really good friend of J.K. Rowling, I might, say J.K. told me this. But you don't typically want to go down that alley unless you know who you're writing about, like personally, or whoever you're writing about says, address me as my first name. Another way you can refer to people while writing is their profession. So if we're talking about Rowling, we could say the author does this, blah, 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 blah. The author thinks this. If we're doing a research paper, we could say the researchers. We could be saying the essayist. Even if we're writing about firefighters, you could, instead of referring to the firefighter as, Susan, 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 you could say the firefighter does this. Their occupation is a great way to address somebody. Another way you can address people is by any titles that they might have. So this includes stuff like doctor, if they have their doctorate. You could say doctor, blah, blah, blah. Another way you can address people is by the accolades that they might have. So you could be like, best-selling author, J.K. Rowling says this, and that's another way you can address people. If you're writing about a book, maybe you're comparing two characters, you can say the protagonist, the antagonist, instead of just constantly saying the main character, like, Harry Potter says this, Harry Potter says this, Harry Potter says this. You could say, the protagonist does this, and that's another way to mix it up. So yeah, mixing it up is always a great way to just keep your reader not bored and not thinking you. The second way to make your paragraph flow is the use of transition words. So transition words, as the name implies, they transition one thought into another, making it a smooth transition as opposed to a choppy, abrupt transition. So if I was writing a essay about, I don't know, dogs, and I said, I love dogs, I love cats. Instead of saying I love dogs, I love cats, I could say something like I love dogs, however, I love cats also. And this just sounds better. It transitions, it flows better. The word however gets the reader in the mindset that you're about to say something that might not agree with the first sentence that you originally wrote. And it gets them in a little mindset of like, oh, there's about to be a switch of thought here, which is always great. Transition words, there's a ton of them, but some of them include however, but, additionally, further, besides. Again, there's hundreds. Just Google it, and on Google there'll be a ton of them. You do not need to memorize them all, but it's always nice to just have 3 or 4 in your back pocket. My go-tos are however, but, additionally, and further. You'll come up with your own go-tos. It's not something you think of, like you don't think, oh, my favorite transition words are these. But as you write more and more papers, you'll find yourself going to, specific transition words more and more and more, and those are always great to have. And then the third thing we can do is using connecting phrases. And connecting phrases are essentially the exact same thing as transition words, except for they're phrases instead of singular words. So these include things such as despite this, not only, on the other hand, while this is true, or like because of this. I know, phrases like that, which again, get the reader thinking, there's about to be a switch of thought here, or there's going to be a flow into something else. So instead of saying, I like sports, I'm not good at sports, you could say, I like sports, despite this, I'm not good at them. And again, this, sounds better than I like sports, I'm not good at them. Just adding the despite this just gets the reader in the mindset that there's about to be a switch of thought, and it just switches up the start of the sentence. What something that everybody should get in the habit of doing is looking at your sentences, and if 2 sentences start the exact same way, add something else, delete something, switch it up, because when you have 2 sentences that start the exact same way, it just doesn't sound good. Like, it's not pleasant to read. There are like very few instances where it would be okay. For instance, like if you're, I don't know, writing an emphasis essay on, why pollution is bad, you could say something like, pollution is bad because blah 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 blah. Pollution is bad, blah 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 blah. Pollution is bad, blah 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 blah. And you're just listing out reasons of why pollution is bad. This is alright because you're adding emphasis and you're trying to really hone in on why pollution is bad, and you're giving like extensive examples, blah 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 blah. But in most cases, you want to avoid repeating yourself. It's always just nice to switch it up. That is all I have for this lesson. Daily writing practice is up. If you have any questions on that, again, feel free to email me. My email is always open. And besides that, I think I'm through for today. So yeah, have a great one, and I will see you in the next one.